Welcome to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we explore actionable insights and real-world strategies to help leaders at every level elevate their impact. Let's dive in and take your leadership journey to the next level. This podcast is pre-recorded and generated for auditory learners, similar to text-to-speech software. The content is intended to provide valuable insights and is not live or interactive. The views and opinions expressed are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the official position of any organization or entity.
I want you to imagine a very specific scenario for a second.
Okay.
Picture yourself sitting in this massive, dimly lit, just absolutely freezing aircraft hangar.
Sounds miserable already.
Right. And it's 3:00 a.m. You're completely alone. And in your hands, you're holding this specialized tool and you are tightening a single fastener on a machine that is, frankly, it's terrifying in its size.
Oh, yeah, the sheer complexity of it.
Exactly, the power. And no one is watching you. The supervisor went home hours ago. Your shift is supposed to be over. And you check your measurement on that fastener, and it is incredibly close to the required spec.
But not quite there.
Right, it's just a hair off. But it's close, you're exhausted, you're freezing, you want nothing more than a warm bed. Do you sign up on the paperwork, just accept that it's, close enough and finally go to sleep? Or do you stop, undo the work, and start all over again?
It almost sounds like a scene from a movie, but it's this ultimate, very real test of character. It asks a fundamental question, really. What do you do when the cost of doing it right falls entirely on your shoulders in the present moment?
And the reward for doing it wrong is instant.
Exactly. Instant, sweet relief from fatigue.
So that freezing hangar at 3 a.m. is the exact setting for today's deep dive. We're looking at a truly compelling piece of writing from the Frontline Leadership series.
It's a great piece.
It really is. It's an article titled "A Thousandth of an Inch: What Jet Engines Taught Me About the Decisions That Actually Define Leaders." And it was written by Chief Master Sergeant Christian Skierski, who also holds a doctorate in business administration.
And, to add some important context to his credentials there, he is a fully FAA-certified airframe and powerplant mechanic.
Which is huge.
Right. He spent years on the flight line as an aerospace propulsion specialist. He didn't study these concepts in some sterile academic environment. He actually lived them. He was literally the person holding that wrench at 3 a.m.
So our mission for this deep dive is to take his world, this completely uncompromising, zero margin for error environment of elite aerospace mechanics, and translate it into practical doctrine for your own life. Whether you're prepping to lead a massive team meeting this afternoon, or you're trying to build a better culture at your startup, or maybe you're just insanely curious about how the highest performing systems on Earth actually operate under pressure.
You're going to leave this deep dive with a completely new standard for your daily decisions.
The premise might seem like a bit of a stretch at first glance.
Comparing a supersonic jet engine to a human organization.
Right. But once we break down the mechanics of how precision actually functions, the parallels become surprisingly direct. It completely changes how you view every small, seemingly insignificant choice you make throughout your day.
It really does.
So let's start with the sheer raw power described in this source, because these machines are staggering. Skierski worked on 2 of the most demanding power plants in the entire operational fleet. We're talking about the Pratt and Whitney F-100.
An absolute beast of an engine.
Yeah, which powers the F-15 Eagle and the F-16 Fighting Falcon across 23 different air forces globally. He also worked extensively on the General Electric F-110 engine. Between just those 2 engines, they've accumulated over 30 million.
30 million flight hours.
30 million. I mean, these are machines designed to carry human beings through the sky at extreme speeds while pulling incredible G-forces.
It is so easy to get lost in those massive numbers, millions of hours, the thousands of pounds of thrust. But the author makes a point right at the beginning that grounds all of that power.
Yeah.
These engines do not forgive imprecision, period. There is absolutely zero flexibility built into that system.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The F-16 Fighting Falcon, which is powered by the exact engines he maintained, reaches Mach 2.05.
Wow.
For context, that's over 1,300 miles per hour. That is literally twice the speed of sound. And the text points out something profound about that speed. The aircraft doesn't get to Mach 2 despite the maintenance that happens on the ground. It gets there because of it.
Right.
The maintenance isn't a hurdle. It is the enabler.
What's fascinating here is the sheer microscopic reality of what makes that Mach 2 speed possible. When we hear about an aircraft breaking the sound barrier, we tend to think about massive scale and just brute force.
Well, absolutely. Explosions in a fire.
Exactly. But the source anchors all of that massive power to a microscopic margin of error. The literal margin of error in this environment is 1,000th of an inch.
1,000th of an inch. I actually had to look that up to really visualize it.
Yeah.
That is roughly the width of a single human hair.
Think about the physical reality of that when he was working on, say, the twin stool architecture of the F-100.
Which is?
Oh, right. For those who aren't aerospace engineers, that essentially means you have two massive sets of rotating blades spinning at different speeds, nested inside one another.
Okay, got it.
Or the high-pressure compressor stages, where air is squeezed incredibly tight before mixing with jet fuel. The tolerances there are almost invisible to the naked eye.
That's wild.
That incredibly tiny measurement, that 1,000th of an inch, is the literal difference between a turbine blade holding together under extreme thermal stress or failing catastrophically and tearing the entire engine apart.
Wow.
Ultimately, it's the difference between a pilot coming home to their family or not coming home at all.
The weight of that precision is just heavy. Every single engine component they touched had a rigid specification. Clearances, tolerances, torque values, it was all documented, and it was all strictly enforced.
The standard was the absolute standard.
Just standard. The text specifically calls out that when he put his hands inside a propulsion system, he wasn't estimating. He wasn't relying on some gut feeling about how tight a bolt should be.
No room for that.
He was verifying. He was being held accountable to a standard written in the absolute language of physics. And I found this detail incredibly sobering. That standard was validated through engineering, sure, but it was paid for through the hard lessons of past incidents.
Written in blood, essentially.
Every rule was essentially written in blood, yeah.
Which brings us to the fundamental operating principle of their work environment, the no gray zone rule.
The no gray zone.
Right.
Yeah.
In a lot of professions, there's room for interpretation. You can round up or round down. But here, you either met the standard or you didn't. There's no partial credit in aerospace maintenance.
No solid B+.
Nope. If you didn't meet the standard, you documented it, you escalated it, and you fixed it.
That friction of adhering to the no gray zone must have been intense because, let's face it, human beings naturally love the gray zone.
Oh, we thrive in it.
We love finding the path of least resistance.
We do. But the moment you introduce a gray zone into a system operating at twice the speed of sound, you're inviting disaster. Good enough is a lethal concept on the flight line. And we can actually see the tangible, real-world result of this rigid adherence to precision in the source material. It wasn't just theoretical posturing.
The payoff was huge. The text notes that the 177th propulsion flight the unit Sikorsky was part of earned the #1 composite reliability ranking across 19 different Air National Guard and active duty Air Force units in the entire F-110 operational fleet.
#1.
And that wasn't just a fluke, that was over a 24-month rolling average.
That is a critical data point.
Yeah.
That #1 ranking wasn't a stroke of luck. It wasn't because they had better funding or newer tools. It was the cumulative, compounding result of thousands of tiny, highly precise decisions.
Yeah.
And crucially, most of those decisions were unglamorous, and many of them were made completely alone without any audience.
Which brings us right back to that freezing cold hangar at 3 a.m. Let's really get into that moment, because I feel like it's the beating heart of this entire deep dive.
It really is.
The author shares this deeply personal anecdote. He talks about being out there on the flight line, torquing fasteners in the middle of the night, no one is watching. He talks about actually re-inspecting work he had already signed off on.
That takes discipline.
And he admits to stopping, undoing the work, and completely starting over just because a measurement was close but not perfectly right.
The tolerance wasn't a suggestion. It was the baseline reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why would someone do that? Human nature screams at you in that moment. I'm tired, my hands are numb, it's close enough, no one will ever know.
Totally.
And the text makes a very specific point that he didn't tear his work apart and start over because he was afraid of a quality assurance inspector catching him the next day. It wasn't about avoiding administrative punishment.
No, it was driven by something much deeper and, frankly, much more unforgiving than a supervisor.
Yeah.
He did it because, as he writes, the aircraft would know.
The aircraft would know. That is such a stark way to view your own work.
It's a realization that physics simply does not care about your intentions. It doesn't care that you were fatigued or that it was unusually cold that night. It doesn't care that you had a flawless track record up until this specific bolt.
Right.
An F-100 engine delivering 29,000 pounds of thrust does not negotiate with you. It doesn't make exceptions because your team was understaffed. It performs exactly according to what was done to it. Nothing more, nothing less.
We spend so much of our lives negotiating with reality, don't we?
Constantly.
We tell our boss, well, the report is late, but I had a good reason. Or we tell ourselves, I skipped the gym, but I had a really stressful day. We constantly trade on our intentions.
Yeah, intention is our favorite currency.
But somewhere above the clouds, there is a pilot pushing past Mach 2, and their life is entirely reliant on the structural integrity of what you decided to do when you were completely alone in that hangar. You cannot negotiate with gravity or combustion. So for you listening right now, the question you have to ask yourself is, what is your O300 hangar moment?
That is the pivotal question. What this source is fundamentally arguing is that excellence is never a public performance. The public performance is just the reveal of your private habits.
I like that. The reveal.
Excellence is a solitary practice. It's built 1,000th of an inch at a time, decision by decision, long before the audience shows up, long before the quarterly review, long before anyone is watching.
We've been talking a lot about metal and physics and turbine blades, but what fascinated me most about Skierski's argument is how this exact same mechanical law applies to human beings.
Yes, the human element.
He explains that while he was out there on the flight line, he thought he was just learning about jet engines, but he was actually being formed as a leader. He was learning that precision is a discipline, not an inherent personality trait. You aren't just born precise, you practice it through daily friction.
Practice is the key word.
And he learned that standards exist for structural reasons, not bureaucratic ones.
We so often view corporate rules or team standards as bureaucracy. Red tape meant to micromanage us or slow us down. But in a high-performance system, the standard is structural. It's the load-bearing wall that keeps the machine from tearing itself apart under stress.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about what happens when we port this flight line doctrine into a standard corporate environment, or a school, or a hospital. What happens when a leader begins negotiating with a standard?
Yeah, because leaders do it all the time.
To play devil's advocate for a second, it's incredibly easy to judge a leader for compromising on a standard. But think about the immense pressure they're under. When you're a mid-level manager facing a missed deadline or a shrinking Q3 budget or a team that is chronically burned out.
Rounding off a standard feels like survival.
Exactly. It feels like empathy. You tell yourself, I'll let this slide today because the team is stressed.
It's the human element. Humans aren't metal turbines. We have bad days, we have emotions, we have nuanced situations.
Exactly the friction we have to acknowledge. It is exponentially harder to apply a zero-tolerance mindset to a messy human organization than it is to a piece of metal. But the text argues that while your empathy is necessary, lowering the standard is not the way to show it. Because when a leader starts rounding, they introduce a variable that the system was never designed to tolerate long-term.
Leaders do this constantly, often with the absolute best of intentions. They say the right words in the all-hands meeting about, putting the customer first, but then behind closed doors, they approve a product ship that they know is buggy because they need to hit a revenue target.
Right. Or they publish a pristine standard in the employee handbook about respect in the workplace, but then they personally tolerate a toxic top performer because that person brings in sales.
They measure the final outputs, but they completely ignore the daily conditions and compromises that produce those outputs.
And this is where the mechanical metaphor becomes so devastating. When you do that, you are actively introducing structural weakness into your culture. You are loosening the bolts.
Then, as the author points out, those same leaders stand around a year later wondering why their engine catastrophically failed, why their turnover is through the roof, or why their major project went off the rails. It brings us to the core thesis of the article. He writes, soldiers and airmen do not follow your intent. They follow your behavior. And your behavior is always measured in thousandths.
It perfectly bridges the mechanical and the human. The aircraft does not care about your intention. It responds to the measurement actually taken. Human beings operate on the exact same frequency.
Yeah.
Your team, your children, your colleagues, they do not care what you intended to do. They care what you actually did.
There is this dangerous, pervasive leadership myth that the small decisions don't really matter. We tell ourselves that we can be a little sloppy in our daily conduct, that we can cut corners on the mundane administrative stuff or the routine meetings, because when the real crisis hits, then we'll step up and be precise.
We treat character like a switch we can just flip when the stakes are high. The flight line shatters that myth entirely. Your daily conduct is not separate from your character in a crisis. Your daily conduct is your character. Your people are watching those small decisions. They're watching what you do when it's inconvenient.
Right.
They pay the most acute attention when upholding the standard actually costs you something, when it costs you time or money or social comfort.
He uses this brilliant phrasing to describe this dynamic. He says your people are running tolerances on you every single day. Just like a mechanic checking the clearance on a compressor blade, your team is checking your clearance.
That is such a great visual.
They are observing you to see how much deviation from the stated standard will this leader actually accept. And once they figure out what your actual tolerance is, they will build a culture in the exact image of what they observe.
If a leader's tolerance is 1/4 of an inch, meaning they let a lot of things slide, they avoid tough conversations, they accept mediocre work, that is exactly what the culture becomes.
The team calibrates to the lowest acceptable standard.
Right. But if your tolerance is 1,000th of an inch, the culture rises to meet the precision you are modeling.
So what does this all mean? How do we actually take this uncompromising flight line doctrine and apply it to our own messy human lives right now, today?
That's the challenge.
The author finishes the piece by challenging us with 3 vital diagnostic questions. And I want to pose these directly to you listening to this right now. You need to really sit with these because they are uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
Question number 1. What are your actual tolerances? And we aren't talking about the core values you have printed on a poster in the break room or the mission statement on your website. What are the tolerances enforced by your daily behavior? What do you actually accept, approve, and walk past without saying anything?
That is a painful audit to do on yourself.
Yeah.
Because the hard truth of leadership is that whatever behavior you walk past without correcting, you have just established as the new standard. Your silence is an endorsement.
Which leads directly into question number 2. Where are you rounding? Where in your life or your work are you accepting close enough when the situation actually requires exact? And more importantly, what is the downstream cost of that rounding?
Yeah.
When you round off on your communication or your hiring process or your safety protocols, what is it costing your people, your culture, and your ultimate mission over the long haul?
We round because it's the path of least resistance in the short term.
Yeah.
It avoids immediate conflict. But the downstream cost is always a degradation of trust and structural weakness. You are essentially borrowing peace from tomorrow to pay for comfort today.
Wow. And finally, question number 3. Who is watching you when you think no one is? Because as the source constantly reminds us, your most important leadership moments are almost never on the main stage.
Almost never.
They don't happen when you're giving a keynote speech or leading a quarterly all-hands. They happen in the metaphorical hangar at Summer 300 when upholding the standard is intensely inconvenient, you're tired, and you think no one would ever know.
Except you. You will know. And eventually, as the culture takes the shape of your private compromises, everyone else will know too. The symptoms of your private rounding will become very public problems.
Yeah.
To summarize the core truth we've unpacked today from the flight line, the jet engine simply does not care about your good intentions. And neither do your people. So if you're going to take on the responsibility of leading, you must lead precisely.
Lead precisely. It's such a clarifying, unforgiving standard to hold yourself to.
It is, and it requires daily vigilance. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you transition back into the rest of your day. Think about the foundational engine of your own life right now. Maybe it's the communication habits of your executive team. Maybe it's your own daily personal routines and discipline. Or maybe it's your physical health. If every tiny compromise you make compounds over time into a major structural weakness, what is the invisible 1,000th of an inch deviation you are tolerating today, right now, that could become your single point of failure when you eventually have to hit your own personal Mach 2.
That is the question you have to answer. What invisible deviation are you tolerating today? Take that thought into your next meeting, your next project, or your next quiet moment alone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep measuring, keep verifying, and don't accept the gray zone.
If this conversation made you rethink how leadership is evaluated, you'll want to stay with Frontline Leadership. Follow, subscribe, and join us as we break down what decision makers are really listening for when the stakes are high.